Welcome back to my channel. In this video, we will be discussing biological clocks and circadian rhythms in animals. Circadian rhythms are natural, internal processes that regulate biological activities on a roughly 24-hour cycle. The term circadian comes from the Latin words circa, which means about, and diem means a day. These rhythms are generated within the body. In other words, they are endogenous. However, these rhythms can be influenced by external environmental cues, such as light and temperature. In animals, circadian rhythms play a critical role in controlling sleep-wake patterns, feeding behavior, hormone release, and many other vital functions. At the core of circadian rhythms is the biological clock. In mammals, this master clock is located in a part of the brain called the suprachiasmatic nucleus, situated in the hypothalamus, just above the optic chiasm. This master clock receives light signals directly from the eyes, allowing it to synchronize the body's internal rhythms with the external environment, especially the day-night cycle. At the cellular level, the biological clock operates through a series of interacting clock genes that produce proteins in feedback loops, turning gene activity on and off in a rhythmic pattern. These molecular rhythms influence various physiological functions, including sleep, body temperature, hormone levels, and metabolism, ensuring that the body performs essential processes at optimal times throughout the day. Circadian rhythms have several key features. First, they persist even in constant conditions, such as continuous darkness, showing they are truly internally driven. Second, they can be entrained or synchronized by environmental cues, known as zeitgebers, with light being the most powerful. Third, these rhythms exhibit temperature compensation, meaning they maintain a stable 24-hour cycle across a range of body or environmental temperatures. These characteristics distinguish circadian rhythms from simpler metabolic cycles. Biological rhythms can be of two kinds: internally driven endogenous rhythms and externally driven exogenous rhythms. What are endogenous rhythms? These rhythms involve an internal clock, also known as a biological clock. This clock runs independently of changes in the external environment, but the clock is set or adjusted by changes or cues in the external environment. For example, the onset of day or the onset of night. Exogenous rhythms, on the other hand, are solely driven by external environmental factors, and an internal clock is not involved. Examples of these rhythms are rare and mainly occur with plants. For example, germination of seeds in desert plants is exogenous because the timing of rainfall in these regions is seldom regular. When a rhythm persists in constant environmental conditions, it is said to be free-running, as it remains unaffected by external time cues, such as the onset of daylight. However, gradually, free-running rhythms drift out of synchrony with the external environment. For example, weta are nocturnal and exhibit free-running rhythms when put into constant darkness in the laboratory. At the start, the peaks of their activity correspond to the external period of night. However, over time, their activity rhythms drift and therefore get out of phase with the external period of night. The period of a rhythm is the length of the cycle and is typically measured as the time between the onset of successive sets of activity. It may also be calculated as the time between successive peaks or troughs of activity. When a behavioral rhythm is free-running, its period is known as the free-running period, and it does not correspond exactly with environmental cues. For circadian rhythms, the free-running period is usually more or less than 24 hours. For example, an activity time graph, also known as an actogram, of a weta in conditions of constant darkness in a laboratory indicates that the onset of activity each day is about 2 hours later than the onset of activity on the previous day. Its free-running period is therefore approximately 24 hours and 2 minutes, which equals 26 hours. When the onset of activity occurs earlier each day, under constant conditions, the free-running period is less than 24 hours. An environmental cue that acts to set a clock is known as a zeitgeber. In German, zeitgeber means time giver. When an animal's activity is synchronized by a zeitgeber to determine the time of onset and offset of activity, the activity is said to be entrained. For example, a crab's activity is tide-dependent. Therefore, the tide coming in or out is said to entrain the crab's activity. Common zeitgebers are the onset of daylight and the onset of darkness. For example, an owl becomes active with the onset of darkness. Changes in seasons in countries such as New Zealand result in the clock continually being reset to the new times of daybreak or nightfall. When an animal in constant laboratory conditions is exposed to a zeitgeber, its activity pattern gradually alters each day until it is synchronized with the zeitgeber. This is known as phase shifting, and we say the activity has become entrained by the zeitgeber. Thanks for watching this video on circadian rhythms in animals. See you soon with another informative video for secondary school students. Until then, happy learning.